So what's up guys, LazyNeil here, and in today's video, I'm going to be diving into the first part of a series of videos comparing Windows 11 and Windows 11 LTSC on my Honor Magicbook X16. Now spoiler alert, these results are kind of surprising to be honest with you, as I expected the opposite to be true. But before we go any further, what is Windows LTSC? In this case, LTSC stands for Long-Term Servicing Channel. It's a version of Windows focused on stability, reliability, and security as its top priority. It's intended for a fixed function specialized for commercial devices that require 10 years of support lifecycle. And as the LTSC version has a longer release cycle than any other editions of Windows, don't expect it to have the latest features which a standard version of Windows provides, making it a perfect choice for businesses who want to run their system without any downtime. Speaking of businesses, this version of Windows is only available for businesses and not for commoners like you and me, making it very hard to impossible to get a copy of the same. As mentioned before, it's only meant for business use. In a nutshell, it's pretty much a bloat-free and a very light version of Windows with 10 years of security updates, making it on paper one of the best versions of Windows till date. So getting the explanations out of the way, let's go through the methods I'll be using to compare the same. First of all, I'll be making a bootable drive with the latest version of Windows 11 and Windows 11 LTSC. For this, I'll be using a program called Ventoy. If you want to know more about it, I've already made a video on the same, so do check it out in the description down below. Now the plan is to partition the main drive into two equal parts and basically dual booting them, as dual booting does not sacrifice on performance and also makes it easier for me to test it out. And finally, as it's running on the same machine, it's pretty much apples to apples comparison. Now, I won't bore you with all the details of installation as it just makes the video longer and it's pretty much very similar to any other Windows installations. Again, you can check out my previous videos on the same. So after partitioning the main drive, installing both the OSs, then updating and installing all the drivers, and installing all the benchmarking software and so on,
one eternity later.
finally, we can run all the benchmarks. Now, just to keep things simple, henceforth I'll be addressing Windows 11 as standard and Windows 11 LTSC as LTSC. Now, there will be more parts like gaming, video editing, battery life test and so on, but it depends on your response. So do let me know in the comments below. Now, all benchmarks will be running on the power connected with performance mode enabled. But sadly, on Windows LTSC version, the PC manager seems to not work as expected. So the option is pretty much grayed out, even after trying to get it fixed for many hours. But I've seen that the battery mode is set to performance in both instances. And lastly, it will sit on top of a cooling pad as the laptop does thermal throttle on heavy loads. And I have always recommended to use a cooling pad while gaming or video editing to give it the best chance possible. So without any further ado, let's look at the results. Let's start off with Cinebench R23. On standard, we get a multi-core score of 8778 and a single core score of 1623. On LTSC, we get a multi-core score of 8135 and a single core score of 1617, which makes the standard 7% better in multi-core and 0.3% better in single core compared to LTSC. Next up, we have Cinebench 2024. On standard, we get a multi-core score of 498 and a single core score of 95. On LTSC, we get a multi-core score of 489 and a single core score of 97. That makes the standard 1.8% better in multi-core and 2.1% worse in single core comparing to LTSC. Let's move on to 3D Mark. First of all, let's start off with the Steel Nomad Lite benchmark. On standard, we get a score of 649 and on LTSC, we get a score of 499, which makes the standard 23% better than the LTSC. On TimeSpy, on standard, we get a score of 1014 and on LTSC, we get a score of 977, which makes the standard 3.6% better than LTSC. Next up, we have Firestrike. On standard, we get a score of 2919 and on LTSC, we get a score of 2997, which makes it 0.2% worse than LTSC. Next up, we have Nitrate. On standard, we get a score of 12,537, and on LTSC, we get a score of 11,165. That makes the standard 10.94% better than the LTSC. Next up, we have superposition. On standard, we get a score of 1,879, and on LTSC, we get a score of 1,889, which makes the standard 0.5% worse than the LTSC variant. On PC Mark 10, on standard, we get a score of 4,621, and on LTSC, we get a score of 4,726, which makes the standard 2.2% worse than the LTSC. On Geekbench 6, as per CPU benchmark is concerned, on standard, we get a single core score of 2,160 and a multi-core score of 9,569. On LTSC, we get a single core score of 2,227 and a multi-core score of 9,584, which makes the standard 3% worse in multi-core and on single core around 0.1% than the LTSC. On the Geekbench GPU benchmark, on standard, we get a score of 8,796 and on LTSC, we get a score of 8,819, which makes the standard 0.2% worse than the LTSC. Next up, we have Firma. On standard, we get a score of 632 and on LTSC, we get a score of 644, which makes the standard 1.8% worse than the LTSC. Now finally, on Antutu, which is our last benchmark, on standard, we get a score of 6,86,442 and on LTSC, we get a score of 5,78,934, which makes the standard 15.6% better than the LTSC. Now, if you're not a geek like me, what does all these numbers mean? To keep it simple, just stick with the standard version of Windows or basically the one which came with your laptop, as overall it gives better performance than the LTSC variant. The reason why I said I was surprised about it was because of the fact that it performed worse than the standard one. Now the LTSC variant did win in some benchmarks, but it falls in the margin of error, so it's pretty much nullified. Now why is that? Isn't LTSC bloat free, so it should give better performance? But the truth of the matter is that bloat and performance does not correlate with each other hand to hand, and it just depends on how well the version of Windows is optimized for it. In this case, on my Honor Magicbook X16. Now some of the reasons could be that the drivers were more optimized for the standard variant. The standard variant was used while testing and development for those drivers. The LTSC variant is not commonly used, so it was basically ignored, and the LTSC does not have the latest updates, so it may not have the performance improvement like the standard one. And if you know earlier that the performance mode in the PC Manager was completely grayed out, so there were some issues here and there running the applications like PC Manager on the LTSC. So I could conclude with saying that it was basically not tested on that version of Windows. But these are just synthetic benchmarks at the end of the day, so testing it on real applications will make the conclusion much clearer. But for now, as far benchmarks are concerned, it's a win for the standard version. So what do you guys think about it? Were you surprised? Do let me know in the comments below. Now, as mentioned before, do let me know if I should continue with the series, testing out other applications like gaming, video editing, and so on. So that wraps it up, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye for now.